could introduce Adam Lehman, who's the president and CEO of Hillel International, the largest Jewish student organization in the world, engaging 200,000 students on 850 college and university campuses in the U.S. and 16 other countries. During Adam's leadership tenure, Hillel International has focused on supporting the Hillel field through the pandemic and 2 wars, strengthening collaboration and connection across the Hillel movement, advancing Hillel's leadership as the innovation lab for the future, and aggressively addressing the alarming rise of campus anti-Semitism. After beginning his career in mergers and acquisitions at Skadden Arps, Adam spent 2 decades as an executive and entrepreneur, developing and growing a variety of new technology, marketing, and media ventures, including as senior vice president at AOL. Adam is a Harry Truman Scholar. He went to Dartmouth College, Harvard Law School. He is a board member in the past of the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington, Beth Shalom Congregation of Talmud Torah and Fair Chance, D.C., and is a volunteer at the Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School and Camp Ramah of New England. Adam has also been active in the Jewish art scene as the author of a series of plays inspired by the Jewish holidays, and is a founding member of the DC-based Jewish a cappella group Jukebox. As you can see, he's been a very busy guy, and I'm honored to introduce fellow woman Chautauquan, Adam Lehman.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Esther, and thank you, Wendy, for the lovely introduction. As a Chautauquan, it's really special to be able to share with this group about the topics that we're going to cover today, but also to have this sense of Jewish community at Chautauqua. It doesn't just happen, so kol hakavod to Esther and really everyone who has helped to create this warm community. It's a good example of what we try to do on campus every day. I'm going to spend a lot of time today talking about anti-Semitism on campus, the challenges, how we're responding to it. Before getting into that content, I do want to recognize we're in the days of Av. We're in a moment of sorrow as we think back to major loss for the Jewish people within Jewish history. We'll tomorrow night begin commemorating Tisha B'Av, this most sorrowful day, noting the loss of and destruction of both of the holy temples and other major losses in Jewish history. But when we commemorate Tisha B'Av in this whole period, we do so not from a place of reliving it. We do so, hopefully, to be in that moment of sorrow and loss for the Jewish people, but to also reflect on how do we avoid those losses into the future. And as I talk about what is challenging and difficult in terms of certain issues facing Jewish students on campus, I invite you not to approach this topic from a place of despair or fear or a sense of tragic loss, but I invite you to approach it from a place of recognizing challenge, but also recognizing what is good and positive on campus and everything we will do to address what is a challenge. So we're going to go ahead and get into it here. I first want to talk about Hillel. Raise your hand if you've been to a Hillel. Pretty good. So I don't need to spend a lot of time on what Hillel is, but I'll give you a thumbnail in terms of, for those who didn't raise your hands, or even those who did, how we're thinking about ourselves and our work today. We're the largest Jewish campus organization in the world, and we're really built on core principles of pluralism and inclusivity. We are all about opening our doors to every young person who wants to experience Jewish life, who sees potential value from being a part of a Jewish community. That's what we're about. As Wendy shared, we have quite a broad scope at this point. We're present on 850 college and university campuses. Our work is primarily in North America, in the US and Canada, but we are present in 14 other countries. And I must say, even though we won't likely spend a lot of time talking about our global scope, we have 43 Hillel professionals in Ukraine who have been absolute heroes over the last several years, serving more than 1,000 Jewish students who are active through Hillel in Ukraine. We've had 3 of our 5 Hillels bombed and destroyed. Thank God no one was injured or killed in those attacks, but it really hits home what we're about and what I think you all appreciate. Being Jewish is being a part of a global people, and the challenges and successes are about what we do across the world. We're more than 100 years old now. We were founded in 1923 at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, and we're powered by our professionals. We have 1,200 amazing Hillel professionals, some rabbis, some executive directors, folks coming from all sorts of different backgrounds and pursuits. I noticed the Rabbi and Rebbitzin with us today from Chabad, and it's similar in that it's a model that begins with professionals who commit themselves to building Jewish life and Jewish community. So that's our core approach. And as Wendy pointed out, we're blessed to be serving nearly 200,000 students every year at this point, who are participating in programs, they are taking on leadership roles, or just otherwise being a part of a Jewish community on campus. So now I want to talk about the issues of campus anti-Semitism, and we're going to get into it in terms of some statistics, in terms of some stories that bring those statistics to life, and then we'll shift to talking about what we're doing about it through our work at Hillel, and where I see trends going, and there's going to be really ample time for Q&A after I share some of this data and some of these perspectives. So the issues this past year were really, really difficult. Many of you saw this, or maybe you had kids or grandkids who experienced it. At Hillel International, we tracked more than 1,800 distinct instances of campus anti-Semitism. That could have been a student feeling harassed, a student walking into a Hillel and being called a baby killer. It could have been a student in a classroom who felt marginalized or silenced based on their identity. It came in all shapes and sizes. And that number of 1,800 is a little misleading. Most instances of a student feeling and encountering these issues, they don't report them because historically they really haven't been addressed even when they have been reported. So the number is more important on a relative or comparative basis. And what we do know from the prior year is that last year, the number of issues jumped by more than 700%. So that really gives you, again, a feel for that. And we saw a type of issue that frankly we rarely had seen, which is full-on physical assaults. Raise your hand if you unfortunately saw one of those videos on social media of a student being pushed or hit or pushed off a bicycle. You know, again, kind of unthinkable, right? It just isn't what we think about in terms of the way people, students should be treating one another on a campus. We had 73 of those incidents that were reported to us and that we addressed, and that's more than the prior 10 years combined. Whoops, lose this. Let's see. Okay. We also saw a real explosion in terms of the number of anti-Israel resolutions presented to student governments. The prior year we had 7. This past year we had 133. The other data point is actually more of a positive data point, as I'll explain more later. There were more than 80 investigations opened into the way that universities addressed or didn't address these issues. So these were under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and that's an important number that I'll come back to. We also did surveying of a broad base of junior students, just so we at Hillel could make sure we could put in perspective the breadth of these issues. Because even if you think about the 1,800 incidents, even if you said we're going to multiply that by 3 to more than 5,000, well, there are 350,000 Jewish undergraduate students on campuses in North America. So it could be that this is really focused on a few students, a few campuses. But what we did find is that 73% of all the Jewish students we surveyed indicated that they had experienced or witnessed anti-Semitism. So that's obviously quite pervasive. More than 50% said that they felt unsafe on campus. That data came from our very last survey in May, which followed the encampments. And 44% viewed their universities as not being sufficiently welcoming and supportive of them. Now, on the plus side, 4 out of 5 said that Hillel and other Jewish spaces became more important than ever, and that stands to reason. Sometimes the statistics can wash over you, so I just wanted to share a few individual stories. There's Tess Vexler, who was the student body president at UCSB in California, and we had really challenging issues up and down the state of California. At her student office, there were signs saying you can run, but you can't hide, Zionists not allowed. You know, she was attacked persistently in social media. And, you know, I'll come back to the power of student leadership. Tess has stood strong and really risen above this, but again, she shouldn't have to face that. Einab Sak at University of Maryland felt that as actually a native Israeli, he was being completely isolated, marginalized, and discriminated against. And Noah Fay at Columbia talked about the fact that just wearing anything visibly Jewish could lead to her being spit on or attacked. And again, some of you saw videos of Jewish students being spit on or harassed at Columbia. So, I mean, unfortunately, behind every issue is the face of a student, a real student who maybe just in their dorm room was dealing with a roommate who stopped talking to them because that student had been on birthright, for example. And again, I won't belabor it. Many of you saw on social media that the fears that students were experiencing were rational, right? I mean, the actual visual experience of walking across the quad at certain schools was horrifying. It was frightening. Before I talk about how we work to address and approach the issues, I want to spend a few minutes talking about what these issues are not. Because a lot of students and a lot of Hillel directors and a lot of other people in the Jewish community were told, number one, it's not that big a deal. It is that big a deal, right? And it's that big a deal for any student from any community if they're facing harassment or marginalization or, God forbid, physical assault or violence. It is that big a deal, and it needs to be addressed. We were told, many of you heard, it's an issue of free speech, right? It's an issue of free speech. I just want to be really clear, it's not an issue of free speech. Number one, most of the issues that I was just describing and that students have raised, those are issues of conduct. For sure, if you're being assaulted, that's conduct. But if your dorm room is being vandalized, as we saw in hundreds of cases, that's conduct, that's not speech. If you're that student walking across the quad with someone walking alongside you and spitting epithets at you, that's actually targeted harassment. That is not protected speech. In addition, for those of you, I'm sure there's some lawyers in the audience here today, you're probably familiar that under the First Amendment allows for reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions so that you can have a campus like we have here at Chautauqua and say, well, we're going to have certain activities in these zones, but not after 10 p.m. or not in a way that creates these other secondary issues. And so much of the protest activity that got out of control blatantly violated time, place, and manner restrictions over and over and over. Again, not about free speech. As I'll continue to talk about, we fortunately at the university level have the benefit of protection under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. It says that It's there so that all students have equal access to educational opportunity. And the standard around it is that a university cannot allow a pervasively hostile, discriminatory environment to exist for ethnic minorities like Jewish students. And there were people along the way who, let's see, I keep losing this.
Today.
There we go. There were people along the way who would say, well, yes, but Title VI doesn't apply if someone's exercising their free speech rights. One of the things I'll share with you that we did was to lobby aggressively with the federal government, including to make sure they clarified, which they did, that Title VI does not have an exception for free speech. You, as a university, need to maintain that safe, welcoming environment, even with protections of free speech being afforded. Raise your hand if you watched the testimony of the 3 presidents in Congress. Pretty much everyone, right? Now, how many of those presidents talked about the importance of the First Amendment and free speech? Pretty much all 3, at least in that first hearing. How many of those universities were private universities? All 3. Private universities are actually not subject to strict First Amendment protection. So I go through this so that even as you all are thinking about, well, how do we balance these issues, we're at least doing so from a place of understanding, not an issue of free speech. So many issues arise in the classroom, and we hear, well, academic freedom. And listen, this again, as the Chautauqua Institution is such a sacred place in terms of promoting free ideas and free expression, and we want that, and that's so critical here, but certainly on our university campuses. But when a professor of physics says, I want to rant about why I believe Israel is the source of all evil in the world, that's actually not part of academic freedom. There is no principle from the American Association of University Professors that says you can just rant about unrelated political content and hide behind the idea of academic freedom. Same thing, we saw dozens of cases of, in the spring, faculty holding classes inside the encampments. Not okay, not an issue of academic freedom. Finally, we hear about this as an issue of Middle East peace. And I'm sure many of us, or maybe all of us, pray virtually daily for an end to violence and war in the Middle East. We pray for safety and security for Israel, and we pray for safety, security, and dignity for Palestinians and other people living in and across the region. That's not the issue on campus. That's not the issue that animated so many Jewish students feeling attacked. We had Jewish students who would go up and say, I'd love to talk to you in the encampment about a 2-state solution. No one was interested in talking about a 2-state solution. The language, the rhetoric was consistent across the core of these protests. It was eliminationist. It was about the complete destruction of the Jewish and democratic state of Israel, and it was conveyed in a way that talked about showing violence to Zionists, to Jews. So unfortunately, we're all for dialogue about issues in the Middle East, but that is not what was at the heart of these issues. So what did we do, right? And this gets back to why I think we all can think about these issues from a place of constructive engagement and positive direction, not just from a place of being upset or wringing our hands. We took a multifaceted approach because that's what was required, and I would suggest that's what's going to continue to be required moving forward. Number one, we invested in security. You all are seeing here at Chautauqua much more in terms of physical presence of security, much more investment. None of us want to be investing gate pass fees in security, but we all recognize why it's important. And same thing at Hillel. We've invested millions of dollars over the last 12 months in making sure that Hillels are as safe as they can be. Sadly, we can't guarantee safety, but we can take the steps that ensure students feel safe and that we all feel comfortable building community in those spaces. Number two, as I alluded to before, we invested in legal and advocacy. And I pretty much guarantee if my predecessor 30 years ago was here giving a talk, he would not talk about Title VI. He would not talk about advocacy with every federal agency that could potentially be helpful. But we need that. We need that. And it actually, I must say, has made an enormous difference. I am talking twice a week to senior officials at the Department of Education, and they are doing important work in this arena. As I mentioned before, they've opened many dozens of Title VI investigations, which in turn are translating into settlements of those investigations, which in turn are creating new standards for how universities have to approach issues. Because at the end of the day, and I see a few students who I know who are on campus today, if a student walks in, at a minimum, what we want is when they raise a serious issue, that they get a serious, forceful response. And these investigations are actually moving us in that direction. I will figure out by the end of this presentation what I need to do to keep this thing alive. Or maybe I won't. So, number three, crisis response. Every single issue that I mentioned,
Switch to presentation mode.
I was there before. Let me see if I can go back. It defaulted back out of it. Thank you. See, collective wisdom. Thank you. A community that thinks together, succeeds together. Crisis response.
There you go.
There's another thing I think it's important you leave understanding. Every single issue I mentioned, we didn't sit there and document it and wring our hands. We had a team on the ground. I mentioned you the 1,200 Hillel professionals who turned their lives upside down over this last year to be available for every Jewish student who had an issue where we could discern an issue existed. We also had SWAT teams who literally could drop in with communications expertise, with legal expertise, with security expertise. So that's part of what we did. I'm gonna talk a little more about university policies later, but changing the core way that universities approach these issues is going to be critical to our long-term success. Wellness support. We actually deploy new wellness programs, mental health counselors, and other resources for students, but also for staff. Because again, staff really have felt the stress of this past year. Education, I'm going to spend a little more time on that. Same with bridge building. Student leadership, I'll come back to as well, but one of the silver linings of this whole period is I have seen the most inspiring young people who not only showed resilience in the face of these issues, but showed leadership, spoke up for themselves, spoke up for their communities, reached across to try to build relationships where other students and other student communities saw things very differently. So again, something as you leave here to keep with you is we're perversely in a way going to be in even better shape coming out of this crisis because of the student leaders who are being formed through this crisis. So I'm going to deep dive into a handful of these topics. Education is so critical. I have to tell you, whether we're looking at faculty, certainly university administrators, and students coming from other backgrounds, there is an enormous gap in education. Now, we can look at that cynically and say, oh, the protester, if you ask them which river, which sea, when they're chanting from the river to the sea, and I don't know, right? So there's a cynical side of that, but the positive side is, number one, Jewish students need to have access to education, to at least understand from diverse, multiple perspectives, but what is the history of Israel? How does Israel relate to Jewish identity? How do we think about the conflicts that are going on right now in Gaza and beyond? So we've made it a priority to bring educators, Raith Al-Amari, who was one of the Palestinian negotiators for the year 2000 efforts at a peace deal. David Makovsky, Ambassador Dennis Ross, Sarah Hurwitz, former speechwriter for Michelle and President Obama. People, Yossi Klein Halevi, we're bringing dozens of amazing thinkers and educators to campus so that students have access to a better understanding, Jewish students and students from other backgrounds. So we will continue to focus, on this educational angle. As I mentioned, we had to improve policy, so we created something called the Campus Climate Initiative. It's really a simple formulation. It starts from the perspective that diversity, inclusion, these are good principles in terms of let's avoid discrimination for all students and let's create welcoming environments for all students, but that has to include Jewish students. If Jewish students are the targets of the most hate crimes on campus, the targets of the most acts of discrimination and bias, then university administrators need to understand the nature of anti-Semitism. They need to understand how it manifests today and why certain ways of demonizing Israel translate to a blood libel, for example. How does that relate back in history to ways that anti-Semitism has been weaponized against all Jewish people? So through the Campus Climate Initiative, there's a core education component for top administrators at a participating university, and then we work with them on policy change. How do we make sure that when a Jewish student comes in and talks about being harassed by a roommate, they're not told, we don't handle that here because that's a political issue. No one asks them what they think about Israel, Palestinians, Judaism, Islam, anything, right? So how do we sensitize and change the bias reporting structure in that case? How do we change the enforcement approaches so that speaking of equity, if there is anti-Black racism, for example, and there's an enforcement approach applied to that racism, well, when there is anti-Semitism, let's make sure there's a consistent approach in terms of how codes of conduct and rules are enforced. We now have more than 75 major universities participating with us in this program. In fact, we'll have 75 university presidents next month in Washington talking about what can they do to make their schools more welcoming and safer in the face of these issues. As I mentioned, we have also invested in ensuring that students facing these issues at least have appropriate legal recourse. We created something called the Campus Anti-Semitism Legal Line, together with the Brandeis Center and the ADL. And this is a way that any Jewish student who believes that their civil rights have been violated has a number to call with trained lawyers on the other side of this. Gibson Dunn and other law firms are providing pro bono service. And again, it's just a great comfort to students, to Hillel professionals, and others to know that if there's an issue, there's someone on the other end of this legal line who can help them navigate that issue. We're not going to lawyer our way out of the issue, even though, again, we need to provide recourse to students. I talked about the critical role of education, and bridge building has to be a part of the solution. The two go together. And even this past year, when so many students on campus felt like there was no one to talk to about the issues, that in fact, because of their Jewish identity, they were being excluded from conversations. Even in that year, we provided our Hillel professionals and student leaders with training. And how do you dialogue across difference? How do you actually put on the table hard, serious questions and issues about Jewish identity, about the Middle East, about campus politics, but do it in a way where there's respect, where there's a quest for understanding rather than a quest for marginalization. So that will continue to be an area of focus for us. As part of that, we created a new Black-Jewish student partnership with the United Negro College Fund, where we're bringing together Black and Jewish student leaders in cities across the country. And we're looking to do this with other communities as well, with Chinese American student organizations, Indian American student organizations, Latino student organizations. You know, again, this is part of not only the solution, but part of the good news that this is possible. And I'll talk about where we're heading this year, but you know, we definitely see opportunities. Before I get to talking about next year, looking back, again, let's reground in the positive. Most of a Jewish student's experience on campus is not embedded within the issues we described. Those 180,000 students who showed up at Hillel, most of the time they're showing up because they're sitting for Shabbat dinner, or they're studying, but they're studying in a place they feel comfortable with friends, or they're learning. You know, they're one of our Jewish Learning Fellowship programs, learning about, you know, sex, relationships, and Talmud. You know, where those come together. You know, or they're getting together to make shakshuka, you know, with their Israel fellow. Some kind of positive Jewish experience. That is still the heart of the work. And thankfully, even in this hardest of years last year, that was still what defined most students' experience on campus. In terms of other bright spots to build on, we've been talking about these issues in a pervasive way, and they have affected students, I think, in a pervasive way. In part because even if you were on a campus where the issues weren't as present, as a student you felt it in social media. But the practical reality is, there have been some administrations and universities that have done a wonderful job addressing these issues. I give a few examples. One of my alma maters, Dartmouth, where almost day one, the university said, or college said, we're bringing together educators, we're bringing students together, we're gonna learn about what's happening in the Middle East right now. And we're gonna learn about different perspectives, and we're gonna figure out how to talk to each other about it. And not surprisingly, the issues there were much more muted. University of Florida, where President Ben Sass was just straightforward, just very clear about what the rules of the road were. And
1,000 people for the first day of Passover in the basketball arena.
Yeah.
And he spoke.
Yeah, well, and by the way, the person, and we're going to shift to Q&A in a minute, the person pointed out that 1,000 people came together to celebrate Passover, and the president, turned out and spoke there. What we found, university leaders who really took the time to address these issues, they stood up, they spoke up, and they showed up. And that showing up matters. And by the way, it's not hard. And something I tell university presidents when I talk to them about these issues, just because you show up at our 1,000-person Shabbat or Passover Seder or community coming together event, doesn't mean you can't do that for other communities. These are not mutually exclusive, but it does mean that you recognize that Jewish students have a place on your campus. So we saw many wonderful examples. Fortunately, we're going to build on that. As I mentioned, these enforcement actions are going to slowly but surely change the rules in a way where Jewish student concerns are going to be addressed more forcefully. And it's a slow march in terms of settlement by settlement, but even when Drexel or City University of New York settles with the Department of Education, trust me, every chief legal officer, every student life vice president reads the settlement and says, oh wait, have we actually pursued every single claim that came from a Jewish student about what happened in the classroom? Did we actually vet that against the standards for faculty? So this is the way that we are going to drive some of this positive change. I mentioned the power of student leadership and strong community partnerships. Many of you are involved in other Jewish organizations, and I have to tell you, again, looking at our friends from Chabad, we have wonderful partnerships on campus with Chabad. Early on after 10/7 in terms of visuals, rallies, and the like, and in coming together in other ways. And we have partnered with federations, with AJC, with ADL, with so many other Jewish organizations to try to make sure we're doing best by one another. Doesn't mean we all do the same thing or even think the same thing. But again, something you can leave with is a sense of comfort that the community under duress has come together in a positive way. I'll wrap up just by talking about what I am expecting as we head into this new year, and then we'll turn to Q&A. Number one, we're taking the bull by the horns to set a tone. So at Hillel International, we've been in the process of distributing grants to hundreds of campuses. So at virtually every campus where we have presence, there's going to be a massive welcome event, and it's going to be visible, and it's going to be joyful, and it's going to send a message that Jewish students are welcome on this campus, and the Jewish student community has a place on this campus. So that, to me, was critical, and that's job one. Number two, we're putting out a new student toolkit by Labor Day, so that, again, if you're a student who's encountered an issue, you have access with a click of a few mouse clicks to great educational content and simple. How do I understand what I'm looking at on CNN? Or how do I respond to this student in a classroom who is really talking in ways that feel harassing and offensive? Who do I call if I have an issue? What are my rights? So that new student toolkit will be available. We just a week ago issued clear guidance to universities so that every university, the ones who have been really strong, but in particular the ones who haven't, know what the standard is. And we kept it simple. We said publish your rules, have clear codes of conduct and policies. They're content neutral. They should apply to all student groups, but be clear about what the rules are. Enforce your rules. Don't get run over by students or non-students who represented more than half of the people that we encountered at encampments. You know, have your rules, enforce your rules, educate your community, and pay attention to the special needs of Jewish students in the context of this year. There are a few factors that we know are going to make this year more complicated, but also less predictable. We have the presidential election and all the other US elections. Neither I nor any of us probably can exactly predict how that will shift the dynamic on campus, but I do believe it will shift the dynamic. And I believe it's going to move us from where there was one issue this past year, which was the 10/7, the Israeli response, and then this massive campaign to delegitimize Israel. It's not that that's not going to be there. It will. In fact, the groups that are focused on that issue have been spending the summer, lawyering up and organizing themselves in terms of how they'll approach it. I just think it's going to be a much muddier set of issues that students and campus are focused on. And finally, I do think, every day there are shifts in the Middle East. We saw with the ceasefire in November, a pretty significant shift in terms of the campus dynamic. So depending on what happens over the next few weeks, we may see a shift there as well. I am done with sharing. I would be delighted to take questions, and I'm going to shift mic-wise. I'll go back there, and I don't know if there's anyone who wants to pass a mic, but if we have a future Elon Hillel student leader. Give him a round of applause.
So let's hear about. So let's what's that? No, son, you're see how much.
Thank you. The question I had is, over the past year, since all of this has happened, a lot of the Jewish organizations have tried with their programs, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the Jewish organizations I've been involved in have also done the same thing. However, when you ask a pressing question like, how do you know it worked? How do you know that that educational program, or that toolkit, or any of those other things, how do you know they work? Now, it makes the individuals who did it feel a lot better, But what are we doing on a concrete basis to say this really works and this will help, and if we spend X amount of money creating these things, that they will come to fruition the right way?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. I should say, you guys heard in the introduction, my background actually was not in Jewish communal work. My background was in primarily business, from an entrepreneurial point of view. So it was all about data, measurement, efficacy, return on investment. And that is the principle that we try to apply to our work, including in this context. Now, we're not selling widgets, and so it's not quite as simple to know point of sale, like, were we up 12% or down 12%. I will say from a student engagement point of view, there, we have very crisp measurement. We actually also are measuring how we're changing hearts and minds in terms of the core work. On these issues of challenge, we're building assessment models as we go, I think is the most candid way to describe it. For the program I mentioned where we're educating university administrators, there, in the first instance, are milestones built around their level of engagement. The second milestones are built around, they're literally taking tests to see, are they getting it in terms of understanding anti-Semitism. The third is mapping best practice, to whether they're adopting what we've identified as best practice. It's a little circular to your question, how do we know it's best practice? But that's number 4. We're doing campus-wide survey work, because at the end of the day, it's easy for us to measure things like, are we reducing the number of physical assaults or reported harassments? It gets a lot squishier when you get into the real student experience. Did that student feel marginalized? Did that student feel harassed? So we're doing broad student survey work to basically see, not to beat up on Columbia, but if I use Columbia as I think a legitimate example where, students were really, I talked to dozens of Columbia students in the spring from all sorts of political perspectives and religious backgrounds and affinities to the Jewish community, and to a student, they felt the hostility of the campus environment. We're measuring broad-based. Where is that sense for students, at this point? And can we bring that down? So we're going to do those more holistic sentiment measures, even as we do the easier part, which, as I said, is measuring do the number of incidents actually dropped as a result. So, but open to, by the way, even after today, any input. It really is harder sometimes to measure return on investment with some of these interventions. And if people have ideas, I'm all ears. And again, how do we do it systemically so that we don't simply invest into the interventions which feel most measurable? Sorry to dwell on this, but it's an important question. For example, we can measure for a boycott, divestment, and sanction campaign, did it pass or did it not? That may or may not, that's really easily measured, but it may not actually dictate a Jewish student experience on that campus. So we're trying to measure both the easy and the hard. Okay, we've got a question.
Hi, the first thing I want to know is, if I know this is being taped, is it going to be available for sale?
I would defer to Esther in terms of.
Will be as I'm white shirt. You can go to it.
Okay, because I have a particular interest in this because my daughter is a psychologist in the New York, New Jersey area, and she started some initiatives, and she's partnered with both Hillel and ATL, and they're setting up support groups for college students and parents of college students, and she also has an initiative going with research on how the anti-Semitism does affect the growth of these college students. So I want to know how I can contact you at some point.
Wonderful, yeah. And my contact information, it's pretty easy to remember, a.lehman@hillel.org, a last name Lehman@hillel.org. I'm glad you raised the point in terms of psychological intervention. So much of what we can all contribute to in this period is promoting resilience. How do we promote resilience for students? Because we need our students to be tough enough that they can handle what unfortunately are going to be certain challenges in this period, even as we work to make sure challenges which they shouldn't have to face, are occurring less frequently. So we've worked with, and this may be your daughter's program, some programs with support groups for students, with support groups for adult professionals, and we're going to continue to build those interventions out.
I'm going to be a little challenging. As somebody who lived at Hillel throughout my college career, when I had issues, I spoke to the rabbi at Hillel, and he, among other things, gave me some Jewish perspectives. And what I hear are surveys and rights and things like that, and I wonder where the Jewishness comes in, number one. Number two, I have a very good friend who's Israeli and a Jewish educator and listens to this, and her role at a day school is taking kids to Israel, listening to parents. She gets calls every day from parents. He's not eating, he doesn't feel well, and laughs a bit. I mean, she doesn't deny the anti-Semitism, but you're talking about all these services. Where do kids, 18-year-olds in Israel are in the army, and where do these kids learn or gain independence and resilience if for every one there are 5 people attending to them? And also, these are kids that have, in general, not had much experience with anti-Semitism. And also in communication, they're going to Tinder for dates, they're not having direct interactions in general, which makes the anxiety and the situation all that much more difficult for them. I just wonder what you think.
Yeah, no, I appreciate several elements you embedded within that. First of all, thank you for underscoring the core Jewish. I shouldn't assume it as a given, but number one, and it ties into the prior comment too, we know that being a part of a rich Jewish community is in and of itself a tremendously protective factor. And again, our daily work, literally, I was trying to convey this, but it is the Havdalah, it is the Jewish Learning Fellowship class, or it's an immersive experience going to Israel, or an alternative spring break to Poland to learn about heritage there, or other ways that, whether at a ritual learning or Jewish experience point of view, that's the core of what we're doing. And it does make a huge difference in terms of even these issues. Often, in fact, again, you're helpfully reminding me to make this point, which is, we can't just be the anti-Semitism organization. At the end of the day, if you're a Jewish student, why bother? The most potent long-term antidote of the work is building rich Jewish community and Jewish experience for the young people we serve. What we have found, and why this presentation, as the topic, can feel more technocratic, is if we don't create the conditions for Jewish students to be able to comfortably engage in Jewish life, then we can't do the main job. And I think it gets to your point about we do need our young people to be resilient and be strong in the face of challenge. But at the end of the day, they're not in Israel. There's a totality of what it means to grow up in Israel and be a part of that culture and society. And there's a totality of what it means to grow up here and go to college. And I do believe that a young Jewish person for sure should be tough, resilient, and able to deal with challenge, but they shouldn't have to do that at 5 times the level of challenge that the student who's their roommate does. And that's part of what we're getting at. Final point, just on your comment, some of the most powerful work at a support level that gets done is with our rabbis. We have more than 100 rabbis spread across our hills. We've actually, this year, we're doubling the number, we call them Ezra Fellows. Separate topic for another time is there is an absolute crisis in terms of the rabbinic pipeline. It's greater outside of traditional orthodoxy. And so we're trying to help solve that too. So we actually found donors to help us double the number of what we call Ezra Fellows, up to more than 40 Ezra Fellows. So these are all resources that bring Jewish to life and bring Jewish to support. We'll keep going, and then I don't know how to, yeah.
I guess the last from the left side over here. What success, if any, have you had with other denominations coordinating? And where you've had successes, have that been because of leadership or their perspective of what their creed is?
Yeah, Hillel, one of the things that makes our organization, I think, both unique and also so powerful is there's an enormous diversity as you look across all the campuses where we're present and the approaches. And typically the most important things that happen are not top down, they're bottoms up. I say that because we've had some really wonderful partnerships at a faith level on certain campuses. Because Syracuse comes to mind, Elon actually comes to mind, Duke comes to mind. And where we've had that success, it has tended to be because the leadership of those organizations, student but often professional, are making it a priority. The other thing, and we could look askance at this or just acknowledge the reality of our world, most of the people I talk to are finding success with those interfaith partnerships are keeping it quiet. Because once they make a big deal out of it, either have a video about it, or even on campus, try to make it too big a group or too much of a focal point, it actually kind of kills the golden goose. Now we're gonna, as I said before, keep working on the skill building so that that's a little bit easier. But for now, we're gonna appreciate the the positive signals that are at least taking place on certain campuses. We are, I should say, too, again, thankfully we have wonderful philanthropic partners. Based on a new re-up from one of them, we are growing the number of micro grants that we provide for specific interfaith partnership, because that does make a difference. If you literally, college kids love free food, and sometimes that transcends issues. And so, if we can provide $2,000 that pays for, it's like the pizza after Shabbat here on the lake. We're trying to grease the wheels in that section. Yeah.
Sir,
Yes.
my wife and I have some skin in this game. We have a granddaughter at a grad school at Columbia and two twin grandsons starting college. My question is, what should parents and grandparents, other than giving money, which is the easiest thing to do, how can they get involved in this situation?
Yeah, it's a great question. Listen, I'll start with your caveat. Giving financial support to organizations that you see doing impactful work does make a huge difference, because that is the way the system is set up in terms of effective organizations being able to execute. But beyond that, one thing, we're very relationship oriented in Hillel. Sometimes we talk about people, not programs. And the thinking there is that getting to know a student makes a huge difference. Having a student feel heard, seen, and engaged makes a huge difference. So for parents and grandparents, checking in with your kids or grandkids regularly, not assuming anything, oh my God, is it horrible? But just checking in. How's it going? How's it going Jewishly? How's it going in class? Like that actually can make a really big difference. An additional thing that we see from parents and grandparents is we're like most nonprofit organizations, we're lay-led. We have volunteer board members. We have folks bringing expertise on committees or task forces. And so, for example, whether it's Columbia or the other schools where your grandkids are going to attend, you can reach out to a Hillel director, a Chabad couple, and ask, what kind of expertise are you missing? It may be accounting, it may be legal, it may be rabbinic, but there are all sorts of ways to contribute at that level as well, and all of them make a difference. Thank you for the question.
Hi,
yeah, right here.
So I'd like to talk briefly, or ask you to talk briefly about the demonstrations themselves. We've all seen the demonstrations on TV. We've seen the social media, the violence, and so forth. I'm trying to learn if there are any demonstrations against, for example, Israeli policies or actions or politics that would not be considered anti-Semitic, or that have not been violent, or that have how would help? Can you use your experience to give us any examples? Are there any universities that have seen these types of demonstrations? Anything you could help us understand more of that aspect?
Absolutely, and I think it's really important because if, as a Jewish community, we're perceived as treating every protest against, whether it's Israeli policy, whether it's conduct of the war, or whatever it may be, as anti-Semitic, then you start to lose credibility, particularly in campus corridors where the administrators I talk to, they're hearing from student communities, family members, and advocates for all sorts of other communities. So to answer the question more directly, we have seen countless examples of protests that have actually been safe, that have been calm, that have been according to rules. So it can be done. And I sat with, I'll just give an anecdote, University of Miami, where at the time, he's now moving, but Julio Frank was the president, and I was talking to their student affairs people. When after, this was I think November, there were a group of students who wanted to put together a protest against Israel in that moment. The student affairs team was in regular dialogue with the students who wanted to organize the protest. The people organizing the protest agreed to the policies of the university. That included President Frank, as a private university, took the position that he believed hate speech was not appropriate for his campus and their campus. And so there was actually communication with the protesters around the language that would be used so that it would not branch into, some reference Columbia, Zionists shouldn't be allowed to live, but would be focused on whatever the policies at issue were. So absolutely, and I do think, again, famous last words, and I'm not going to say it in this large group, that, everything's going to be fine, because it won't be. It'll be messy. But I do think that universities are, fortunately, paying more attention to what are the practices that will lead to more productive protest activity or conflict in a way that doesn't produce the issues that we're most concerned about.
So I would, back here, so I would like to address the questions about resilience and what can parents and grandparents do. Educate your children earlier than college. By the time they are in college, they don't have, as somebody who's taught Hebrew school since 1972, somebody who's worked at somebody who has a connection with Jewish camping since 1972, our kids would be more resilient if they had the information that they could use with confidence against those who don't have information. And what you had said before about the importance of education, the importance about dialogue, if our kids felt more comfortable in dialogue with people who don't know history and don't know culture, then of course they're going to be very wary about answering questions and face-to-face with the protesters because they don't have that background. Just an observation.
And another piece to that is, as a rabbi of the congregation, I often find parents themselves, in a variety of different circumstances, may not be as fully prepared to educate their children. And you can't rely on a Hebrew school teacher for 2 hours a week on a Sunday morning to teach your children about Judaism. Teach, as Amy said, teach your children about history. You have to be, they have to be an active part of that process of educating their children.
Yeah.
And I think that you guys do an excellent job in playing catch up, but that can be very difficult.
Yeah, no, I agree with both points. And when we were dealing with an earlier crisis within Jewish life, where Jewish parents were not modeling what they expected their kids would do, it's the same issue. Jewish parents need to talk about the issues that their kids are confronting in a way where their kids can then become speaking with them about it. And getting to this during K-12, I think could be huge as well. Okay, so we got a few more.
I believe that's hard.
And you know what, like, maybe we'll take 3 or 4 questions because we're getting towards the end, and then I'll try to wrap them together in terms of answers.
Oh, wait, so why are they confused?
My dad was getting like it was.
He's like, it should be.
I'm not.
Who is it? Stag. I think when you say.
What's alarming to me is that the students who are protesting are ignorant of all the complexities of the history and situation. And this is a failure of the universities. And what are the universities doing to correct this?
Yeah. So I'll answer that quickly. No question, this flattening of history, this flattening of knowledge, and acceptance from faculty in particular of these totally myopic or anti-intellectual approaches to thinking about complex questions and issues is a huge part of the issue. Universities, in some cases, there is a marketplace dynamic here where there are certain universities that are, actually pushing toward real education about the Middle East, about identities, including Jewish identity. I think they will fare better over time. We're trying to bridge the gap, and you're right, we can't replace the university from David.
Shout out to Hillel. In the state of Ohio, we just passed something called the Campus Act. When I talked to the main sponsor of the act, he says the guts of the act, where it came from, and all the provisions, came from the students and from Hillel. Hillel not only, he said it was more important than what the federations gave or anybody else. It came right from the students and right from Hillel, which in the part of the act that we're talking about, it requires now, like at Ohio State, at the University of Ohio, that they have to make their records open in public to the students after they file a complaint. The kids figured this out. It didn't come from the organized Jewish community.
Yeah, thank you. And again, this is where we're doing work that we wouldn't typically do, including activating our students to lead the way in those issues.
Yes, to change the tone a little, I'm curious to know if Hillel is growing, if the impact on campuses is growing, if maybe what's happening is even driving, you're more popular, perhaps because of what's going on. We've got temples who are losing membership, and I'm wondering how the young people, what you find in the younger generation.
Yeah, great question. We are absolutely growing. We were growing before this, and that was a function of, back to the first question, really getting serious about how we were investing our resources to maximize the value for young people in terms of why the Jewish experience could be worth their investing their time. But we've seen a surge. A lot of other Jewish organizations have as well. So we're really focused on how do we capitalize on that surge. Just if a Jewish student is suddenly studying in Hillel because they just feel more comfortable, how do we engage them in, whether it's education, how do we engage them in Tzedek or Tikkun Olam or other activities that are actually aligned with one of their passions? So we're working hard on that. I don't think it's going to solve long-term synagogue membership, but I do think it's going to light a fire in terms of a generation of young Jews who are going to care about their Jewish identity and a Jewish future.
Okay. 2 comments. I had one, but then I waited a while, so now I have to start. The first is responding in part. The first is a comment, not a question, but the person who had asked about what parents and grandparents can do. One of the networks I'm a part of has spoken very persuasively about the value of not just giving money to Hillel, but to tell your alumni associations in the university that you're giving money to Hillel instead of where you usually give it to. Make sure the university recognizes that there's consequences to their reactions of things since October. Additionally, my question for you, but also an action for all of us, is at the RNC a few weeks ago, there was a very strong voice from Shabbos Kestenbaum about the impacts of anti-Semitism on college campuses. It was very well received. Interestingly, he's a registered Democrat. He did not endorse any candidate. My understanding is that there was not a similar person lined up to speak at the DNC, but I was wondering, A, if you have reached out and gotten any traction, and then B, wanted to encourage everyone here to reach out to the Vice President's office, Senator Schumer's office, and Congressman Schultz's office to reiterate the importance of having a Jewish voice speak at the DNC. This should be a bipartisan issue.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, and it ties back to something that was mentioned before. Actually, everyone's engagement in the civic process here, whether it's state level legislation, whether it's federal, it really is making a difference. We've seen great engagement, actually, all the way up to the current president of the United States. Certainly, I've spent a fair amount of time with Second Gentleman Emhoff, and some time with Vice President Harris. We've talked to congressional leaders on both sides of the aisle. So, I mean, this actually is currently still a bipartisan issue. I can't speculate on whether in the end there will be speakers at the DNC. I can tell you that we have been in contact with some representatives about opportunities. And speaking of Shabbos Kesselbaum, I didn't even know this at the time. I hear he was here on Fridays speaking, so he gets around. But bottom line, it's a great question, and again, it's a great area for adults like all of us to make a difference. I think we're close to wrapping. Doctor, one more question, or should we? One more.
I've got the microphone.
Yeah, you got it.
So at the University of Buffalo, Hillel organized a rally after the October 7th events, and sadly, the students were afraid to come, so it was only a couple of Hillel people. The wonderful part was that the community came out in full support, so it was primarily adults, some professors there, and in fact one of the churches in the area was the largest contingent there. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on community involvement with Hillel and things such as that.
President who says, I don't know, I just talked to Jewish Voices for Peace. I heard the Jewish position. Yeah, I've literally heard that. And you have to be able to show the data that shows, no, in fact, the dramatic majority of Jewish students do not feel that way. Just because someone has a Jewish background doesn't mean that they can't themselves express an attitude, a belief, or an action that is anti-Semitic. That's true for any form of discrimination. It's not that by virtue of being of the discriminated against group that you are immune from that capacity. So for starters, I think we have to represent our community from the center of where that community is. Number two, it goes back to so much else we've talked about. There is education required so that at least we're all singing off the same song sheet. Doesn't mean we have to agree about everything, but let's make sure across the diversity of viewpoints within the Jewish community that we can at least learn together and think together about what it is we're looking at. And that includes dialogue across different skills and skill building. Finally, related to the first one, we need to, for those students, they have to be subject to the same consequences of any student. And that's just part of what we're insisting on with universities. But I'm gonna close building from the complexity of that question. That's hard, right? It's Jewish student against Jewish student in that context. It's dramatically different views. It's different agendas. But at the end of the day, there is a vibrancy to Jewish life in this moment, even amidst this challenge. There's a vibrancy to Jewish life on campus. And back to one of the earlier comments and questions, it's in part because Jewish students are being forced to grapple with what it means to be Jewish, what it means to do Jewish. Again, as I said before, the role of Israel within one's Jewish journey or not, but at least understanding the role of Israel within Jewish history, Jewish theology, Jewish culture, Jewish peoplehood. So that gives me great hope in terms of where we're going. And I hope that at least this discussion gives you all a sense that organizations like Hillel are not taking this lying down or sitting down. We are aggressively advocating for students and empowering students like the amazing voice you just heard. And together they're going to lead us to a much stronger Jewish future. I promise you that. Thank you guys so much.